Let's ask Sir John Redwood, former Conservative MP, of course. Sir John, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
We live in interesting times, as the saying goes. Nothing seems to be going very well for the government, and it looks as though this week's not going to be any better.
No, I know. I can't believe that they're thinking of doing a repeat of what they did to disabled people on children who have special needs. And there are so many of those children who have genuine needs which are provided for under contracts, and some of them are at private schools. And Labour's hatred of all that seems to overcome normal human sympathy.
Yes.
It may be that there are too many people now qualifying for rather lesser conditions. That's worth looking at. But don't threaten all those people who already legitimately got this and need that day by day to help bring up their children.
No, they seem to have no nuance about them, which surprises me. You know, they sort of, everything is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, you know, instead of actually being sensible like they could have been with the Winterfield allowance for pensioners. Everybody urged them to take their time and to give it a bit more time before they could see where they could make the cut, which most people would agree with, that, you know, if you're wealthy and you're reasonably well off, you don't need it. But they didn't do that. They just went blanket ban. And the same for, you know, the no need for a national inquiry into the Muslim grooming rape gangs. Oh, no, don't need that. We've already done one. And then suddenly, oh, now we do need one because a baroness has told us so. You know, it's all very kind of chunky. It's very jerky sort of government. You know, they seem to lurch from one thing to another, lurch across the carriageway and then lurch back again.
Well, indeed. And you'd have thought they'd have some common humanity, wouldn't you? And
yeah.
I remember as an MP, the first thing I always asked myself when some new idea was put in front of me was, how would it affect the poorest or the worst off, or the person who's most likely to be affected in my constituency, and was that acceptable? And quite often it wasn't. And we see with Keir Starmer, he couldn't even turn to his Chancellor when she was in clear distress in Prime Minister's questions and say something reassuring, and he wouldn't even say to the House of Commons that she was going to keep her job. And then a few hours later, his spin doctors presumably told him that the markets wouldn't like it if they thought the Chancellor was about to be fired. So he then had to say what he should have said at the time out of normal human sympathy.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very odd moment. I think it will probably define him and his government over time. Because looking at the stories in the Telegraph today about a wealth tax being considered, and of course the unions are quite keen on it, Neil Kinnock's certainly keen on it, the sheer numbers, I mean, I'm looking at numbers today, which I'm sure you've seen, Harry Cole's published them on Twitter, coming from Henley and Partners. It's around about sort of 35 to 40,000 people basically leaving the country. As a result of the high taxes that have already been placed on people who are reasonably well-off individuals. And the bulk of them, 10,000 of them practically, and another 7,500 going to the UAE and the United States.
Yeah, indeed. And why don't they understand this very simple point? I mean, the Treasury advisors ought to be warning the Chancellor of this by now, that getting rid of all the non-dom tax arrangements just meant that a lot of very rich billionaires left who were paying very large sums of money to our country. And then the other taxes started hitting people who got a few millions who thought, well, I want to hold on to these and I can pay a lot less tax if I go somewhere warmer and maybe even nicer, they thought. So it's a disaster for the government that they don't understand this. And they should look at their own numbers and realise that the top 1% of income taxpayers are already paying 30% of the income tax. How much more do you think you're going to get out of them? It's far more than most other countries do.
Well, quite. And also, somebody was extrapolating that round to kind of, you know, the top 10% of people, how much they pay and the top 25% of people pay something like 75% of the income tax in this country.
That's right. And none of us mind the rich paying more. Of course the rich should pay more because they've got more money. And those of us who've got a bit better income are happy to pay a bit more so that other people get something to help them with their lifestyles. But there are limits to that. And we're seeing that this government has gone well beyond the limits. And the idea that there are a lot of people with a few millions who are prepared to pay 2% of their wealth every year is just completely bonkers. And there are quite a lot of people who've got quite a bit of wealth tied up in a house or some kind of trust fund or something which they can't lay their hands on, who haven't got the income to pay a whole load more tax.
Right. And that's the problem. It's the same solution to the same kind of situation with the farming inheritance tax, isn't it? That, you know, on paper it looks like to a government a government analyst that there's somebody with a load of money there, but actually they're sort of, you know, they're not cash rich. They don't have the ability to pay tax on an asset which they're not really milking.
No, indeed, and the farmers very often they're getting very low returns indeed, because remember they need to earn their own income for all the work they put in, and then they ought to get some return on all the capital they got tied up, and they scarcely get one of those, let alone both. And then the government says, "Oh well, you're very rich. We'll make sure we take a bit of the farm away if you die or if you pass it on to your children."
Yeah.
And then you won't have the same number of family farms, and it's becoming very marginal. I want us to grow a lot more food in this country, and that could be done with a little bit of support for the family farms. Instead, they've got to be taxed out of existence.
Yeah. And do you think this government really is as useless as it appears to be? Is it being driven? It's kind of mysterious to me whether it's being driven by this ideology of kind of, you know, laying bare you know, everything that made Britain what it is, and having a kind of a grudge against a lot of what we like to celebrate as British. I was at Wimbledon on Saturday, and I just thought to myself, you know, when people were cheering for the armed forces and welcoming, you know, various celebrities from the sporting world, you know, I thought this is the real Britain, and this is what we should celebrate, and we should we should not forget that this is what most of Britain is actually like.
Indeed, we've got a huge amount to be proud of, and there's a lot of beauty in the countryside and in some of our older buildings in this country, and there's a lot of people who are generous and full of goodwill and undertake charitable works. And yet Labour ministers seem to hate a lot of us and want to just take more tax off us or drive us out of the country and undermine the values that Britain has stood for so many years. I think it's a tragedy. I don't know why they're so tone deaf. I suppose it's because there's a series of extreme left-wingers within the party making ministers' lives a misery and driving them in the wrong direction. And I think this latest possible attack on special educational needs is because they don't like the fact that some people are getting state help to go to a private sector school, which happens to be the specialist school that child needs. Well, get over the ideology. This is something that is well done, meeting the need of a family that otherwise would be in trouble, and you shouldn't be attacking them.
No. Let me play you what Bridget Phillipson said yesterday about what they think that they've done well.
Your colleague, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, said he'd give you 7 out of 10. What would you give yourselves as a government?
I think I'd be inclined to agree with Johnny. I think that's about right. I think we have made enormous strides forward in a lot of areas. Of course, there's more to do. And of course, we hear what voters are telling us, that they voted for change, they're impatient for change, they want to see it and feel it in their communities.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Johnny Reynolds. I'm not sure that's going to stick, but they seem slightly deluded as well, don't they, about the things that they've had successes at?
Well, do you notice she didn't list a single one?
No.
And so what are they really proud of? And she didn't also admit that so many things have gone disastrously wrong. I mean, robbing the pensioners turned out to be a bad idea, and they cancelled that. Threatening the disabled turned out to be a bad idea. Giving away the Chagos Islands and a load of money to Mauritius is deeply unpopular and stupid when you're short of money. They've put in unemployment up. They've taken job vacancies down. They've put long-term interest rates up by a bad budget. They've overtaxed people so that 10,000 millionaires have left already, and many more are going to be leaving this year. And there's just such a long list of chronic failures, obvious things that you and I and more than half the British public were telling the Labour government not to do, and they were unable to listen, and they were unable to understand simple English.
I mean, that is a massive, massive problem, isn't it? Because every year that Labour are in for, if it's as bad as this one, I'm not sure where we're going to be if they last out a full 5-year term, because, you know, the economy is already suffering grave warnings from international boards and things, people saying, you know, we're going to borrow so much money, we literally won't be able to borrow any more.
Well, that's right. And the shocking fact is that Rachel Reeves said that when longer-term interest rates for one day got to quite a high level under Liz Truss, she said that that had crashed the economy. Well, this year, those longer-term interest rates, all this year so far, have been well above that one-day Liz Truss level. So on her own basis, the Chancellor has more than crashed the economy. It's been a serial crash, doing serious damage. And why do we have so little money to spend on worthwhile things? Well, it's because we're now paying over 100 billion a year in interest charges on all the debt so far. And this government thinks they want to increase the amount of extra debt compared with the old Conservative plans. And they're going to end up paying much more interest on every bit of debt they take out, because the markets are saying, we don't trust you, you're overspending, you're not serious about controlling the public money. And normally when a government starts to lose control of the public money, it loses public support. And if it doesn't change, then it gets thrown out of office. And after all, the Labour government of the 1970s had to go to the IMF to borrow money and created a complete disaster. The Labour government in 2010 fell over because it had run out of money. They themselves said they'd run out of money, and they'd made a complete mess of public finances, and Conservatives had to come in and reduce their planned spending in order to make things more affordable. I'm surprised that in their first year they're already getting themselves into that position, and they really ought to read a bit of the history books or talk to some of their former colleagues who presided over the previous crashes.
Yeah, because I think that's exactly where we are. I don't think we're very, very far from another one, do you?
No, I think we're on the way to one, and they should pull back before it is too late. All of us want our country to do well, and you know, Labour say some of the right things, that the way to reduce the benefit bill is to get more people into work. Well, to get more people into work, you need an expanding economy, and they're discovering that high tax, high borrowing, high interest rates does the opposite. So instead of getting people off benefits into work, they're going to have more people wanting benefits. And then the Labour response is, well, why don't we cut the benefits on people like the disabled? And the public understandably said, no, that's not what we wanted at all. We want real change to have faster growth. How do you get faster growth? Lower tax rates. That's what works around the world. Just look at our neighbours in Ireland. They set a much lower business tax rate than us, and they actually clean up. They take all the big American investments, many of which would come to Britain if we had a competitive tax rate.
Yeah, I know, it's tragic, absolutely tragic. So John Redwood, good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Former Conservative MP there, saying we are perilously close to some previous Labour government fiscal crises.